Hello, Malty Mongery, Morangi, medicinals. We'll stick with that. I'm Ralphie, welcome to my channel and to Ralphie Review 935 Extras. And a big thank you to Alan Patterson for that malt mention. That's, you see, the thing is, it's Morangi, but it could be Morangi, because there's no Glen in front of it. See, if it was the Glen was in front of it, it would be Glenmorangie, right? Although I was speaking to somebody recently in a bar who insisted that it was basically called Glenmorangie, right? So, but it's fine. The guy was paying for his whiskey, so he could call it whatever he wanted. Not a problem. Anyway, off to a slightly wandering start here. As you can tell, I'm a little bit under the weather, to be honest. And I have caught a cold. It's quite a mild one, actually, on the scheme of things. But it has knocked my senses a little bit. But it doesn't stop me from enjoying a glass of single malt or pure malt now and again, purely for medicinal purposes, you understand. And this is a particular bottle I want to introduce because opportunities like this are going to get thinner and thinner on the ground. I opened this bottle for a live stream not that long ago for my Patreon supporters. I do for those who subscribe in my Patreon channel, I do a bi-monthly live stream for 2 hours from the bothy. And I just decided to go into the stash, pull out a bottle that I've bought at auction years ago, and just open it for the live stream and just share the first moment, the virgin experience of a new old bottle. There's been plenty of them around the auctions, there still are. And whereas you used to pick a bottle up for what, £15? Sometime in the early days you could pick up one of these bottles for £10. Then it was 15. Now it's usually about 20 to £40. And these are yesteryear's bottlings. And what's quite enjoyable is trying to do your research online and getting absolutely nowhere, because these old brands, they were never documented, they were never archived, because there was a lot of them. And back in the old days, and I'm talking about post-war 1960s, the Scotch whisky industry was very much a family-owned affair, full of small nondescript brands that kind of followed the theme of Scottishiness, tartan, Glens, Bens, regiments. There's a lot of always a strong military connection, because this was just the way it was. And it's kind of, you would get whiskies like this, which were never, even in their day, they were just purely a novel alternative drinking experience. So it would just be another blend where you basically, as a business, went to the warehouse, said, I'm looking for such and such a blend to be bottled for my badge, and they'd do it for you. It would go out into the market, and then that would be it. You'd get the sales, you'd keep your brand afloat, and you'd be competing with all the other brands that looked kind of similar, sounded kind of similar, and tasted kind of similar to yours. Then latterly, excuse me, the quality of whisky was going downhill. Now, this idea that whisky used to be better than it is now, it's far too wide sweeping and generally not true, because in the old days a lot of whisky was actually really poor quality, immature stuff, and some of it frankly wasn't particularly well made, because the makers and distilleries were poorly paid people who were left to get on with it, and the compensation for the job was getting pished. because the goods had free alcohol. That was a major factor in their pay, as a result of which they would be making their whisky at the distillery under the influence, and therefore not getting it quite right. Now, it works both ways. Sometimes we get it absolutely right, and a classic distillery example is Little Mill, where there's times you'd taste Little Mill in the old days and it was just, 20 odd years later, after they'd barrelled the new make spirit, you could actually still taste the soap where they'd used it, grated carbolic soap, over the washback to dampen down all the foaming of the yeast. This happened, but this is where Macallan made its reputation. In this variable sea of quality, a few single malt distilleries started to stand out. They always produced good stuff, but now they sort of presented it better. Obviously a good example, apart from Macallan, is Glenmorangie and Glenfiddich. Now, these were three single malt brands in Scotland which were very highly regarded, and many of the others were hardly even noticed, even in Scotland, because Scotland, frankly, was never a big whisky drinking culture. By the 1960s, it was just a bevying culture. People weren't stopping to smell and to taste. People were just guzzling back. I distinctly remember, if you've got time for a story, that there was one night I was just hanging out the window, and I noticed a drunk guy walking up the road. And I just kept quiet because I was really intrigued as a young child to see an adult literally holding on to railings for support and then staggering up the road, stopping again, going onto his hands and knees, crawling up the road, then getting up again by use of a lamppost, and then staggering across the road into a hedge and then out again. It was hugely entertaining, but I realised that I had to keep quiet because the intoxicated gentleman was clearly not in a good mood, and it was not far from the window actually when he tripped on the curb, fell flat on his face, and there was a sound of tinkling glass. At this point he just sat there livid. He was livid. "You bastard, you bastard, that's my night gone, it's my night gone, my night's gone." Because he'd smashed what was left of his bottle of whiskey. Not many people were looking for the subtleties, the nuances and the sophistications back in the 1960s. Brands would sell on their novelty, on a certain amount of loyalty, because people picked up a sort of certain brand. People would adopt a certain brand, like Crawford's, for example. Crawford's actually made really, really good whiskies. Their blends were consistent and decent. Same with Teachers, another good example. This is why they survived. Of course, I don't know if Teachers are going to survive much longer, because they basically ripped up the magic recipe, which was 45% single malt whiskey in the form of Ardmore, into the Teachers brand, and that was a very solid recipe for success because it was single malt heavy, reasonably standard blended whiskey, and it had its big fans because it was quality. As soon as you tasted it, you're tasting quality. So when I go to auction and I see these old disregarded yesteryear brands like the Real Mackenzie, the first thing I'm looking for is it a blended Scotch? In other words, has it got column still grain in it, or is it single malt whiskey, a blend of single malt whiskies? Now here it says 8 years old pure malt Scotch whiskey. Now, I find this very intriguing because if it's pure malt or single malt, in my opinion, it weathers well in the bottles for far, far longer. That's just the way it goes. So when you go to buy at auction, basically you're doing the standard checks. Is it realistic? Is it genuine? That's what I want to establish. Is the seal completely sealed? And bear in mind, most of these bottlings will be screw tops, which actually makes it easier to open. And I'll look at the neck fill level. I'll look at the content of the bottle. Is it reasonably clear? Does it look like it should look when it was bottled? Because when you lose alcohol from out a bottle over a long, long period of time, it turns slightly cabbagey, cabbage cloudy, and tastes absolutely awful because I've tried it. And I recommend that where a bottle of whiskey loses alcohol, it loses its integrity because the alcohol is preserving the liquor. And if the alcohol's no longer there in sufficient strength, the liquor is compromised and could cause food poisoning. So be aware of that. So I bought this one. I've bought many others, but I bought this one. And I opened it for the live stream. And I have to say, absolutely, first impressions, what I'm looking for is that it isn't cheesy. If it's excessively cheesy, then I know it's kind of gone off. It's gone a little bit rank. But no, it wasn't. It was really uptight when I first opened the bottle. Now, because of my nose and my cold, I'm not tasting much at the moment, which is why I haven't poured myself much. But the clarity, unpeated, fresh, zesty, lemony, citrus, the clarity of the flavour is beautiful. And you don't have to go to specialist whisky auctions to find these bottlings. You will find them in general auctions. And this is something that people overlook, particularly if you're in the United States where liquor auctions are not a thing, which really surprises me. But there again, across the United States of America, there are highly oppressive liquor laws, hugely oppressive liquor laws, and it's historic, and goes back to Prohibition, where the establishment, the deep state, lost around, and I've never got over it. This is why Prohibition still looms strong in modern United States liquor laws. And this also extends into Canada. And these laws are basically there to say what you can't do, what you mustn't do, what you won't do, and what can't be done, and what you must never attempt, etc., including distillation, obviously. And it gives you very little information on what you actually can do, because it's the culture. But when you open a little bottle like this, an old school bottle, from 40, 50 years ago, wherever you find it, and you could even inherit it in a will or buy it in a bottle shop, bottle sale, you never know where you're going to trip over these kind of bottles. When you open them, it's really worth keeping the historical context and going back to that moment in time when that whisky was bottled. In this case, probably in the late 1970s, early 1980s. What was the world like then? How was whisky made then? What grains were used then, and what lack of pesticides and fertilisers were on the crop? How was it handled in the production space by the people making the whisky? Does it come across as a slow, professional distillation or something hasty and rushed? Is it a jaggedy whisky, or has it got that certain refinement and that complexity which help to deliver the quality of what's there? So there we have it. I've introduced you to the real Mackenzie which is a play in the Real McCoy, which is another story for another day. An inexpensive whisky. It's cost me about either 20 or 40 pounds. I would be at the auctions in the old days. I would be scouting around towards the end of the auction in the cheap seats, looking for novelties. And what they would do is they bundle up a whole load of bottles, and you maybe even only want one bottle out of the box, but you had to buy the other bottles with it, but for all the price you might as well. And that's when you discover these delightful little eccentricities. And what they do is they give you a flavour experience and smell experience that informs you when you're opening modern contemporary bottles. So I hope you found this useful, interesting and helpful. When my nose and palate are much improved, which won't be too long, I look forward to I might actually give you a full review of this, but I can't at the moment because I'm a little bit shot in the nose in particular, because that's what happens when you get summer colds. Thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this. Click likey, subscribe, all the resty, and we'll see you soon, malt mates. And remember to keep your malt moments magnificent.